Does it count as an AI generated song if you add in your own elements? I've gotten comments, probably over 100, asking me in some variant of this question of people saying, hey, Mark, well, I actually write my own lyrics. I'm a lyricist. I write my own lyrics. But then I use Suno and I add those lyrics in and it creates a song. Does that count as AI music or did I make it? Or I actually write the guitar riff, the guitar melody, and I use Suno to make some kind of instrumental backing. I take that backing, add it into the song. Does that count as AI music? Here's the, and again, nothing worse than this answer, but I'm going to give you an honest answer right in the beginning. It really depends. And I'm going to give you two different perspectives on this. And I look at this very similar to the ship of Theseus. I've talked about this a lot in different videos. It's like a philosophical experiment where if I have a ship and I replace one piece of wood, is that the same ship? A lot of people would say, yeah. But if, let's say, over years, every piece of wood on that ship is replaced, is it still the old ship or the new ship? Some people might say yes. Some people might say no. It's the old or the new. And then at what point does the ship turn into a new ship versus an old one? In a very similar way, I think this is what's going on, is because there's been a lot of controversy, let me word it like that, when it comes to AI music, a lot of people are worried, like, shoot, well, I do a lot of stuff to the song. I don't just enter in a prompt and then it gives me a song and that's it. I do a lot of work, but does it still count? In addition, the last video I just posted on this channel at the time of this video was about Spotify potentially taking down AI music. And some people have been worried, being like, shoot, well, I do use Suno. I do use AI elements. Does that mean my music could be taken down because I do add stuff? It is a bit of a mess. And I will say this, there is a massive gray area right now. And that's what makes a video like this kind of tricky to make in a very short snippet. But overall, I'm going to say this. If you look at a lot of stores' policies and whatnot, they don't really address AI music. Besides Deezer, which I've talked about a lot, besides Deezer, they don't really address AI music. That being said, they have mentioned, there have been many one-sentence lines of a lot of stores and CEOs and people saying, look, if you're using AI tools, and I think that is the best way to look at it. If you're using AI tools, that's pretty much, I'm going to say almost 100% of the time, almost 100% of the time allowed. That is okay. And I think this is where things get a bit vague and a bit tricky. Because let's say for me, let's say I make a song, and like I said, I write all the lyrics, and then I put it into Suno, and it generates an instrumental, and it combines, and you have someone sing, so it's a guy or a girl singing the lyrics, and it creates a song. Well, technically, I did do a lot of work. I wrote the lyrics myself. Maybe I'm a poet. Maybe I'm just a songwriter, whatever the case is. And I use Suno. To me, that's a little different. You're using Suno as a tool to assist in you making a song. If, let's say, I mentioned this before, I actually use Suno to make one song, my song Cachaça, where it was the original song that I made was a pirate song. It was a pirate Chisanti song. I took one of the vocal lines of that song, brought it into Ableton, took another orchestral element, brought it into Ableton, used those almost as samples. I almost treated them as if I downloaded them from Splice, but they're unique just to me, and then I made a whole song around them. That to me is very, very different, right? Because I added all this other stuff, all this kind of stuff that I personally made, and then I just use those elements as small little things. And I will say this, that I think in this day and age, it is a bit of a tricky thing. Because this also kind of comes back to a lot of things. Take something like Splice. There has been a lot of controversy, especially when Splice started to blow up, where people are like, hey, this is not really production. If you're going to Splice, you're just downloading samples and stems, putting them into Ableton. You didn't really do anything. It's super easy, and there was this controversy. I think the thing about AI music now that makes it so difficult and brings up this kind of video, there's a reason why I've gotten over 100 comments, hundreds of comments, of people giving me in some variant of them saying how they did this, does that count, blah, 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 is because there is this kind of gray area where AI music generators, let me say that, it's so easy. It is so easy just to make a song. And it is a bit of a spectrum because you could argue, if I type in a prompt, which is the typical one I do when I'm testing out, say, the new Suno version, right now it's on Suno version 5, for example. If I type in a prompt saying, make me an electronic song about parkour, Well, on one end, did I really do anything? No. Let's be honest. Did I make that song? No. Did I add in any technical elements? No. Did I mix or master it? No. So I didn't do anything. Some people, though, might argue I still have to think of that prompt. I disagree. I literally just typed in one sentence, but I could see that argument where technically I did have to think of the sentence, make me an electronic song about parkour. And then you have this other spectrum, like I said with My Song Cachaça, where it's like, I'm really looking at Suno as a way to make one small little sample, one small little thing that I'm going to kind of take, break out the stems, grab that one stem, throw it in my track, and then make everything around it. And I'm going to be honest, where is the cutoff? It really is tough to say. If you look at the prompt versus, like, say, the way I used a sample on Suno, where's the cutoff? Is it 50%? Is it that if I add in more than 50% into a song that I made, and, like, say, the other less than 50% was from Suno or an AI music generator, does that mean it's more mine? Because, like, say, it's 60% human, 40% AI music? It's tough to say. And then, like, say, if it's 50-50, is it more on the AI side? Is it more on the human side? So the first thing I'm going to say is it is tricky. Like, where that cutoff is, it's actually an AI-generated song, it's truly AI music, or if it's human music or whatever, it's tough to say where that cutoff is, right? And I think that's why, I think for a lot of people, being worried about their songs being flagged as AI, or maybe more of a, if I'd use this word, like ego-based thing, like, hey, Mark, well, I use Suno a lot, but I still feel like I made it. Like it's still considered human, right? Because I use this as this. Like, you wouldn't consider this AI music because I played the guitar in it, right? And at this point, it's splitting hairs. It is splitting hairs. And so on that note, the second thing I want to mention on this video, because again, those 2 points I want to mention, the second thing is, well, and maybe a lot of you are thinking this right now as you're watching and or listening to this video, who cares? And I hate to say it, I do kind of agree. I think which is interesting is what's going on right now with Suno and AI music generators is kind of very similar to, like I said, Splice. I actually think there's a lot of parallels, because I think the idea when it comes to production and making music is how much of the music you're making is coming from you, how much of it is coming from an external source. Because if you think about, like, years ago, for example, if I were to use samples, I'd still make everything on my own, but I'd still use a kick sample, a hi-hat sample, a clap, a snare, or whatever, maybe a vocal shout. People would not really consider that using samples. I mean, by definition, you are, but it's like, well, you need a kick, you need this, you need that. But then I think the thing with Splice, it really started to become a problem for producers, depending on how you look at it, is loops. That I could get a huge pack, download all these loops. Even a lot of packs right now contain kits, typically 5, meaning each kit is almost a mini song in of itself. So you could easily just download all the samples from that one particular kit, put them in Ableton, do some stuff to it, and it's like you don't really do that much. And I think it becomes more of a big picture music making perspective, and I think AI music is really driving this point home, for better or for worse, that I think a lot of musicians and producers have this perspective of, if you don't make it yourself, it doesn't count. Or if you're not putting in the work, it doesn't count. And I gotta be honest, it is one of those tricky dilemmas. This brings up, if anything, this video isn't necessarily, I'm gonna be honest, as much about the technicalities of AI music, although there's parts of that in this video. It's more of the bigger picture of, does it count as your song if you don't put that much work into it? And then, like the Shiva thesis, how much work do you have to put into it in order for it to be classified as yours? Where it's like, if I use that example again of percentages, if let's say I use 60% of my own stuff in this one song, but then 40% is just samples, does it count? In addition, take even like sampling artists like Daft Punk, of course. Pretty Lights is a phenomenal sampling artist. There's a lot of them out there. Some of these sampling artists, if I'd even word like that, I'm not saying Daft Punk is 100% a sampling artist, but they do use a lot of resampling and everything. But if I take someone like Pretty Lights, what he does a lot of samples, chops them up, warps them, flips them, does crazy stuff to them, adds in some of his own elements. And I'll be honest, some of Pretty Lights' songs are like 90% just samples. So someone might argue like, hey, dude, Pretty Lights, Derek Vincent Smith, Derek didn't really do anything with this. But then you have to consider, well, there is an art form. There is an art form to taking different puzzle pieces from all these different places, transforming them in a different way to make it more interesting and more unique, and then putting them together, that is an art form. There are people who are masters when it comes to sampling and resampling and everything. And from that perspective, someone might say, well, yeah, maybe all the elements in their song, they didn't make themselves. Like say 100% of the elements in the song, they didn't make themselves. But the way they used those samples, the ways that they transformed them, the way they manipulated them, shows their expertise as a producer, as a musician, or as an engineer, or whatever. But again, it does bring up this second point that I'm bringing up is, who cares? I think even Diplo, there was one kind of funny viral video that Diplo did. I think he was promoting his sample pack on sounds.com. And he said, look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're using samples or not. It matters how you use them. Because for a while, he kind of made fun of a lot of producers where they're like, hey, like, I made this sample. He kind of made this funny joking video. Maybe I'll do like a reaction to it where he's like, at first, I'm going to make my own drum sample, but I realized that wasn't good enough. So I decided to make my own snare. And then I realized, you know what? If I make my own snare, it doesn't really count because I didn't make the wood. So then I decided to grow my own trees in order to make the wood for that snare. So it was more authentic, right? And he kind of was making jokes about some people saying, hey, well, you didn't really make this. You didn't really make this, so it doesn't count as your song. You didn't really make this one sample, this one loop. So hate to say it, it's more you cheating. Splice is cheating. Splice loops are cheating. In this case, AI music is cheating. And I will say this, there is a spectrum, I think, of how easy or hard things are. Like back in the day, you had like Vengeance sample packs that made it was a bit more tricky to use those samples, if I had to use that word. And then when Splice came about, it became way easier to use samples, and especially loops. And you have these loops that were just full-on melody loops, or vocal loops, or drum loops, or whatever, where you could just kind of plug and play, if I'd word like that, and it was way easier. And then I think people kind of felt like, whoa, this is too easy. There became a feeling for a lot of musicians of it being too easy so it doesn't count, or you're cheating, basically. Like, this is not real production. It's not real producing, if I'd word like that. And then you look at AI music, which I think is, I will say, of course, a step up. What's even easier? It's even easier now to use AI music to create stuff. And so on one end, I'll be honest, as someone who's been producing for years and been a musician all my life, I started with classical piano, moved to jazz saxophone. Of course, now I do electronic music production and everything. I do see some elements of that one side of people saying, man, this is not really real. Right? It's not really making music, you're just cheating. But on the other end, I'm like, who cares? Like, and I think sometimes, and I do kind of get this perspective, maybe it's an ego-driven thing, maybe it's a bit of a worry of, like I said, stories taking down AI music, where I've gotten, like I said, way more comments than you think, of people really splitting hairs of saying, hey, like, well, I use this one guitar part in my song, but then another guitar part I actually took from Suno. Does it count as AI music? Should I be worried? Like, should I tell people I made the song? Does it count that I made it because I used mostly Suno, but then I added into my own lyrics? Or I used Suno to create an instrumental, but then I sang over? Like, you could see where this is like a whole mess. And on one end, like, yes, I can see this perspective of maybe a percentage or a spectrum of what is really you, what's really AI, what's really you, what's really a splice loop or whatever. But what I've realized after looking and studying a lot of the biggest producers on the planet is a lot of them say, hey, don't care as much about the process. I've noticed that a lot of big musicians, upcoming musicians, so like small to medium, I'm going to say it like that, like EDCB level musicians, so like small to mid, really focus on the process. Like, what DAW do you use? Do you use Splice or not? If you do, what sample packs do you use? Do you use Serum 2, or do you actually prefer Massive? Or do you prefer another one, or whatever, right? And I noticed the biggest producers are like, hey, let's just focus on the end result. I don't care how you got there, within reason, but let's just focus on the end result. Like Skrillex, when studying him, doesn't really use Serum that much. I think he'll use Massive here and there, but he actually just loves these stock Ableton plugins where he'll take a weird sound and then manipulate it a million times over with a bunch of audio effects and whatnot. You might just use Operator or something like that, or maybe the wavetable function in Ableton. Pretty simple. He just focuses on the end product. And I think that's a big thing I want to say, and that's why I'm kind of driving the second point home is, for a video like this, which I know is a bit all over the place, and I know sometimes I do make very specific videos. I make some videos that are like a minute long where I teach you how to do something and they're ultra quick. And I know on a video like this, it's more a bit vague, more a bit ambiguous, But as you can tell, I'm purposely trying to make this video ambiguous to drive the point home that, look, you can argue till the cows come home all this stuff. If AI music counts or not, if samples count or not, displays count or not. You could argue it for hours. But at the end of the day, the biggest producers don't argue about it. They just make music. They just make music. Like for me, I made songs that I might say were 95% AI generated. Then I've also made songs that maybe were 5% AI generated, and 95% of it was for me. And yes, sometimes I do kind of feel a certain way of, like, say, I do use mostly AI generated music. But at the end of the day, I'm like, you know what? I actually make a good record. If, let's say, that involves using more AI stuff, I'm going to do that because I want to make a good record. If that involves maybe me using more human-made stuff, if I'd word it like that, I'm going to do that as well. And so although I know sometimes a lot of people who are using Suno as more of a tool rather than an end-all be-all, and I do think that is a big difference for a lot of people. It's like, are you relying on Suno because you can't make music and you have to type in a prompt? Or are you using it as more of a tool in your toolkit, just like Serum 2 or Splice or another kind of element? You're using it as like almost like a plugin, if I'd word it like that. You're looking at Suno as like a VST. Either way, it's like splitting hairs about if it counts or not and how many elements you're using. At the end of the day, the best thing to do, just make music.